This podcast contains descriptions of violence against children and adult language and is not suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Hi everyone, and welcome to Suffer the Little Children, the true crime podcast giving voices back to the victims of child abuse and shining a harsh spotlight on the parents, guardians, and caretakers who silenced them. I'm your host, Lane, and this is episode 151, the Kendzia Children Updates. Over the course of a 7-part miniseries that began last September called Groomed to Die, the Kendzia Children, I told you about the countless alleged crimes committed by Susan Lee, formerly known as Susan Stevenson, Susan Cook, and Susan Kendzia. I told you about Susan's charges in the 1980s for the murders of her 2 adopted infant sons, Michael and Kevin, and her subsequent murder trial, the chronic, inexplicable illnesses suffered by Susan's daughter, Shain, throughout her first 28 years, and Susan's alleged abuse of her own children, her stepsons, the children she babysat, and the 3rd infant she was somehow allowed to adopt even after the first 2 died under suspicious circumstances. In this episode, I will provide multiple updates in this saga, including Susan's sudden death in April of this year, the shocking results of her post-mortem tox screen, and the placement of a headstone for baby Kevin after 37 long years. I'd like to thank my newest patron, Eva Linda C. from Kansas City, Missouri. Thank you so much for your pledge. Every pledge sincerely helps me to keep this show going. For those who don't know, I spend most of my time working on the podcast or on things related to the podcast. I also do freelance writing assignments as often as possible to try to make ends meet. If I have to go back to work full-time, I can't continue the podcast, so huge thanks to all of my patrons for helping me to keep this podcast going. Even though I recently surpassed 3 million total downloads, the content makes this show incredibly hard to find sponsors for, so it really is a labor of love, and I appreciate all of your help more than I can tell you. With that, let's get into these updates. I'll do my best to give a quick recap of the Kendzia story, which I told over the course of 7 episodes starting in September of 2022. For much more detail, I definitely recommend giving the miniseries a listen. For now, my miniseries is the only coverage you'll find of this story. In August of 1985, Michael Thomas Kendzia, the 9-month-old adopted son of Susan and Tom Kendzia, died after he supposedly stopped breathing at the family's home in Smithfield, Virginia. This wasn't the first time Michael had stopped breathing in his adoptive mother's care, nor was Michael the first baby to stop breathing while in Susan's care. In fact, Michael was the 3rd who Susan had to revive with CPR, the first being her daughter, Shannon, and the second being a child Susan was babysitting named Julie Bates. Michael only lived with the Kendzias for 2 months before he died. The medical examiner found that baby Michael had multiple bruises on his face, head, and body, which he said suggested child abuse. However, because he could not definitively determine how the injuries occurred, he ruled Michael's death undetermined. He did, however, rule out SIDS as Michael's cause of death, which Susan continued to insist it was. Despite Michael's suspicious death, and despite Susan's hospitalization in February of 1986 after a suicide attempt, Susan and Tom were allowed to adopt a 2nd baby in March of that year. 2 months later, in May of 1986, 4-month-old Kevin Ryan Kendzia also stopped breathing and died in the same Smithfield, Virginia home where the brother he never met also lost his life 9 months earlier. Susan was charged with both babies' murders. A judge granted her request to try the 2 cases separately. At her bench trial for Michael's murder in December of 1986, Susan was acquitted due to lack of evidence. The prosecutor decided not to pursue her murder charge for Kevin's death because there was even less concrete evidence to prove Susan's guilt in that case. Even though the specter of Munchausen syndrome by proxy was brought up at Susan's trial, no one apparently took a deeper look at her family dynamics. If they had, they would have found that Susan's second biological child, her daughter Shain, was chronically ill, often hospitalized without a diagnosis being made, and had undergone 2 surgeries by the age of 5, as well as countless other medical tests and procedures. After Susan's acquittal for Michael's murder, she and Tom divorced, and she moved with her daughters, Christy and Shannon, to Rock Hill, South Carolina. Before long, Susan married her 3rd husband, John Lee, who soon gained custody of his own 2 sons, John Christopher and Levi. Shannon continued to be chronically sick without ever receiving a solid diagnosis. She was also sexually abused multiple times, mainly by her cousin, Corey, who lived with the family for some time. Meanwhile, Susan was reportedly abusive to all 4 of the children, but she was especially hateful toward Shannon and Levi. She ran a daycare center out of her home, caring for mostly special needs children, who she also reportedly abused. The daycare was supposed to be shut down at one point due to a CPS complaint, but Susan continued to operate. All the while, Shannon continued to be inexplicably sick and to undergo constant medical procedures. She was diagnosed with pancreatitis around age 15, which Susan told her would kill her by 23. At 17, Shannon reported to her guidance counselor and her family doctor that her mother and John were abusive and neglectful, but her complaints were ignored, and CPS was never contacted despite school staff and medical doctors both being mandatory reporters. At age 28, Shannon was finally able to break Susan's control and move away, at which point her unexplained illnesses stopped. However, Susan systematically destroyed Shannon's relationships with everyone in her life. Shannon stopped communicating with anyone in her family and legally changed her name to Shain to try to shed some of the trauma Susan heaped on her. In 2013, Susan's husband, John, died of a long-term respiratory illness. He was in home hospice care for several years, during which he had expressed to multiple people his belief that Susan was trying to kill him. The same year, Susan was allowed to adopt a 3rd baby, a little girl I called KL in the episode, who Susan abused throughout her childhood. In early 2022, hearing that Susan was on her deathbed, Shain returned to Rock Hill, where she reconnected with her sister Christy after 13 years. When the sisters began talking about their mother, Christy at last came to believe that Susan was responsible for Shain's illnesses and their baby brother's deaths over 35 years before. They also uncovered Susan's trophy binder, an eerie collection of newspaper articles about Michael and Kevin's deaths and Susan's subsequent trial. While Susan was supposedly dying, her daughters recorded several conversations with her, during which she made several incriminating statements and even a couple of outright confessions. Miraculously, Susan made a full recovery, and her brother, Susan Stevenson, essentially busted her out of an assisted living facility they had her placed into. After getting CPS involved, Christy got full custody of her adopted younger sister, KL, getting her away from Susan's abuse for good. In the meantime, Shain took all of her evidence to the police, who began an investigation into her allegations of enduring decades of medical abuse at the hands of her mother. And that is where I ended the miniseries in January of this year. Since then, there have been a few major updates in the story. I've been in close contact with Shain ever since, and I'm honored to have any part in helping her tell her story and give her brothers a voice. On April 11th, 2023, Shain's world turned upside down when Christy sent her a message containing a screenshot from Facebook, where a woman in Rock Hill made a post that read, "To anyone that knew my friend Susan Stevenson, also known as Susan Lee, she is Betty Stevenson's daughter, and she used to attend Redeeming Life Ministries. I am saddened and shocked to tell you that Susan passed away in the middle of the night last night. Her brother Gene and his wife Linda has asked me to please pass on this information. No other details are available at this time. I will keep you posted as I know more. Please pray for the family. I'm tagging the people that know her or Miss Betty. I know Miss Betty and Gene need your prayers." Shain didn't know what to think. She reached out to the Rock Hill police detective who was investigating her claims against Susan to find out if he could confirm Susan's death. The following morning, the detective emailed Shain saying he confirmed with the York County Coroner's Office that Susan Lee did pass away on April 10, 2023, while in hospice care. He also assured her that Susan's death would not stop their investigation into Shain's abuse, which is still underway as of this recording. Understandably, Shain knew immediately that Susan's death was anything but natural. She told the detective so, explaining that she wanted an autopsy performed. However, because Susan died in hospice care, her death was essentially expected, so the police couldn't sanction a state-funded autopsy despite their ongoing investigation into Susan's alleged medical abuse. With nowhere else to turn and time running out before the coroner's office could no longer hold Susan's body, Shain gave me permission to create a GoFundMe campaign. We didn't raise enough for a full autopsy, but we did raise enough to have a tox screen run. Huge thanks to everyone who donated, and a very special thanks to Christine M. for her especially generous donation. Evidently, when she died, Susan was under hospice care in her home, presumably for her various maladies of questionable veracity, including respiratory and cardiac illnesses and diabetes. At the time, her brother, Marion Jean Stevenson, and his wife, Linda, had sold their home and moved in with Susan, whose house was on the same property as the home where her mother, Betty Stevenson, lived. On April 14, 2023, Shain drove several hours from her home in Virginia to Rock Hill, where she went to the York County Coroner's Office and found out Susan's body was being held at the Parker Funeral Home. She had them immediately put a hold on her cremation. Shain then stopped by the funeral home and said her very emotional goodbyes to her mother's body, hoping that seeing Susan in person would help her wrap her brain around the reality of Susan's death. After the coroner sent Susan's blood, urine, and vitreous samples to have the tox screen run, she was presumably cremated, although we don't have definitive confirmation of that. What we do know is that Susan's brother, Gene, opened his own GoFundMe with a $2,000 goal shortly after Susan's death, titling the campaign, Loving Sister, Susan Lee Stevenson Lee. According to the campaign page, he raised a whopping $145 towards Susan's funeral costs. As far as we've been able to tell, there was no public funeral or memorial service for Susan. The tox screen results took longer than expected, and Shain eventually got a phone call from the pathologist Dr. Robert Thomas, Jr. on May 28, 2023. To sum up their conversation, I'll quote directly from the letter Dr. Thomas sent Shain, dated May 31, 2023. Dear Ms. Kendzia, I've completed my external examination and toxicology review on your late mother, Susan Lee Stevenson. I have included a copy of that report as well as my report for your review. As we discussed on the phone, she had multiple compounds and medications/drugs in her system, the most significant of which was morphine at a markedly elevated level of 8,000 nanograms per milliliter. This level is, in my opinion, undoubtedly the acute cause of death. The other analytes may have played a contributory role, most particularly acetone, which suggests she may have been in diabetic ketoacidosis. Again, the level of morphine present is felt to be the largest contributing factor. Please do not hesitate to contact me if I can answer any additional questions that you may have. I hope this process has given you some additional closure and answered some of the questions which you posed. Please accept my condolences on the circumstances around her death and your past relationship with her. Sincerely, Robert E. Thomas, Jr., M.D., pathologist. Dr. Thomas's report began, the decedent was a 63-year-old white female with a history of Munchausen syndrome and prior history of drug addiction. The last part of the report read, blood submitted to NMS Reference Laboratory for toxicology testing revealed multiple compounds and/or medications, including a markedly elevated level of morphine at 8,000 nanograms per milliliter, morphine metabolite, hydromorphone, benzodiazepine, lorazepam, acetone, among others. After review of the limited historical and medical information of the decedent, external examination, and toxicology examination, it is the opinion of the examiner that the decedent, Susan Lee Stevenson, died as a result of morphine toxicity. The presence of acetone suggests the possibility of diabetic ketoacidosis as playing a contributory role. For reference, according to Frontiers in Pharmacology, Typical morphine post-mortem concentrations in blood in fatalities are from 200 to 2300 nanograms per milliliter. Susan's was 3.5 times the highest end of that range. The other compounds found in Susan's blood, besides the morphine and acetone, were 2 antihistamines, Haldol, an antipsychotic, Cymbalta, an antidepressant, and Ativan, a sedative in the benzodiazepine class. Dr. Thomas told Shain that in his opinion, Susan's acute cause of death was almost certainly morphine toxicity. Currently, Susan's death certificate lists her manner of death as natural, and despite an autopsy not being conducted, the cause is listed as chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD, with diabetes, cardiomyopathy, and pulmonary hypertension listed as other significant conditions. Shain has every intention of having those rulings changed. Whether the manner of death is homicide or suicide is the question. After finding out that Susan's death was anything but natural, Shain went to the York County Sheriff's Office and filed a report, giving them the toxicology information, Susan's background, and any other pertinent information. Now, it's up to the Sheriff's Office to determine whether Susan or someone else is responsible for her death. I'll pause here for a quick word from my sponsors. As I mentioned during the miniseries, after Kevin died in 1986, he was buried next to Michael at St. Luke's Cemetery in Smithfield, Virginia. However, although Michael got a headstone not long after he was buried, Kevin never received one. His grave has gone unmarked for 37 years. Late last year, with Shain and Christy's blessing, I created another GoFundMe campaign to raise funds for a headstone for Kevin. Thanks to everyone who donated, we were able to pull together enough money and order a headstone for Kevin that was roughly the same size and shape as Michael's. We also owe a huge debt of gratitude to Blake Baker and his company, R.W. Baker and Company Funeral Home and Crematory in Wakefield, Virginia, who was extremely generous with the price he gave us for the stone. Thank you so much, Blake. Blake anticipated the stone would take about 8 months to manufacture and install. I finalized the order on December 10, 2022. Imagine my surprise when, barely 4 months later, in April of 2023, I got an email from Blake with a photo attached showing that Kevin's headstone had already been placed. Shain immediately got to work planning a dedication ceremony for Kevin's headstone, which she scheduled to take place on Saturday, June 24th. For a while, I wasn't sure if I'd be able to attend in person, but thanks to Shain's close friends and chosen family, Becky and Donna Walker, I was able to make the trip. Along with my son, Andy, who was my guest in episode 145, I drove about 9 hours from New Jersey to Virginia. Meeting Shain for the first time was amazing. We've been talking for a year and a half, and I don't think I'm stepping out on a limb to say we've become pretty good friends in that time. Giving her a real-life hug for the first time was a long time coming. I had the pleasure of meeting Shain's big sister, Christy, as well as her husband, Mike, and their kids, who now include Christy and Shain's younger sister, KL. Also at the ceremony were Mike and Lynn Peters, the girls' godparents, who I talked about in the first 2 episodes of the miniseries. I also got to meet Lee Bug, who was one of the kids who attended Susan's in-home daycare. I told you about Bug's experience with Susan in episode 5 of the miniseries. I also want to thank listener Emily J. for donating her time and photography services at the ceremony. At the headstone dedication ceremony, first, Shain's friend Becky spoke.
My name is Becky Walker, and I wanted to welcome y'all all to Kevin Ryan Kendzia's celebration of life and celebration of the placement of his headstone after only 37 years. Thank you all for coming, and we're going to be kind of shooting from the hip a little bit. We've all got some notes, but we're all a little bit scattered. Things have been a little bit crazy leading up to this. But anyway, I want to thank St. Luke's for all that they did, in helping us to get this set up and making sure that we had, everything that we needed. Death for most is a scary prospect, and others, it's an avenue of intrigue. But no matter how you perceive death, the loss of innocence, the loss of the light, snuffed out before it's even really had a chance to burn, it leaves you empty and asking why. And the beauty of this day is we have a lot of answers today. Kevin Ryan Kendzia had a light. He had a beautiful light, a powerful light, a much more powerful light than any of us could have imagined at the time. You see, the beauty of the light is that it takes only the smallest amount to illuminate the darkness. I wonder if you all would close your eyes and just be with that darkness, because that is what our life would be without the light. Kevin, Ryan. Now, if you would, just keep your eyes closed for a moment and imagine off in the distance a flicker of light off in the distance, as if someone is walking towards you carrying a match. And as the flame burns down and begins to diminish, another light, another match is lit from the flame. Closer and closer this person comes. And each time the new match is lit, it gets a little brighter and a little brighter. And closer they come until overrun. This light, the light of this day, is that very light. It is that light of Kevin Ryan Kendzia that burned in the heart of a 5-year-old girl named Shain. She is who carried that light. She kept that match lit, that flame of Kevin. She refused to forget. She held on. Shain held on to Kevin's light while she walked through some of the worst of darkness. She refused to allow the light of his innocence to die. And it kept her light going strong for many years through so many horrible things, because she was determined that she wasn't going to let that light die. So, as she continued to carry it one day, just a couple of years ago, COVID, as it changed everybody's life, it changed her life too. Shain came to a point where she felt like she wasn't going to, her own light might be diminished. And without that, would there be anybody to carry the light of Kevin and his brother Michael, who was also taken in the same tragic way? So Shain, out of fear, reached out. And on that day, Kevin's light grew a little brighter, a lot brighter actually. Because unlike Michael, whose life he had a footprint on this earth. He had a headstone. There are pictures of Michael. Kevin was left with nothing but what you see here. This was all that was of that child's life. And you would think that such a short time on this earth, his light would not shine quite so brightly and stir such an effect in someone, but it did. So, in November of 2021, Shain sent an email asking for help. This is what I have. I need this story to be told. She sent that email to Lane. She shared Michael and Kevin's story with Lane, and Kevin's light grew even brighter because the glimmer of hope fueled by the electricity of finally being believed and being heard by someone, along with the flame of Kevin's will to shine. It literally kind of blew Shain's life up, actually. It blew her life up in some amazing ways and in some very painful ways. But it was all because of a 5-year-old girl who refused to forget that she had a brother. When I asked Shain, what is the thing that you really want said at this ceremony? What is, besides, along with Kevin and Michael, just the beauty of this day, that this child finally has a footprint in this world, and that he, there's evidence that he did in fact live, is miraculous. And for that, and that's the true reason that we're all here. And a big part of that was that woman right there, whose name rhymes with Shain, was Shain. And that was what Spanky asked. I'm sorry. I knew it.
You did it on purpose.
That's what Shain asked.
You did it on purpose.
Was that, make sure I tell him about Lane. And well, the truth is that I don't think that you could tell the story of Shain without Lane. It's kind of like watching a movie without the sound. You can get the gist of it. You kind of understand what's going on a little bit. But the sound's what gives it clarity. It's what makes it make sense. And Lane makes sense of Shain. Imagine the mindset of a woman who has been betrayed in the most foul of ways by nearly every person who was supposed to love and protect her. Rejected repeatedly throughout life by those who tried to connect with her. Labeled a troublemaker and a liar. Never having a foundation or even a voice. Then suddenly, out of desperation, literally a dying breath scenario. Because that was why Shain reached out to Lane. She feared she may die of COVID, and Michael and Kevin's story would die with her. So, on November 23rd of 2021, she sent an email. And 7 days later, Shain's entire life began to change. Hi, Shain. I'm sorry it took me this long to get back to you. I'm so sorry for your loss and for everything you've gone through. I'll definitely take a look at the newspaper articles and get back to you. Someone listen. Those were magic words to the heart of someone so broken. I see it as if there were a one-woman band in Spanky's head, beating the drum, stomping the cymbals. You suck, you suck, you suck, you suck. And that's what happens. That's what goes on in her head. Elaine just walked up and put her hand on her shoulder and said, no, you don't. You have value, and I want to hear your story. Elaine took the time to sit down and read every single piece of everything that Shain and Christy acquired, and all the recordings. She started with just a few newspaper clippings and articles. The point was, she didn't question Shain's validity. She didn't try to defend or make sense of any of it. She looked at it. She continued to see evidence that, what Shain was saying was true, and she kept following it. And to be honest, I don't know if Shain had ever been trusted like that by someone before. Lane has continued to suit up and show up throughout this journey with Shain. She's giving her a voice for the very first time through the podcast, Suffer the Little Children, and even helping her find help when she needed to process it all when it got too much. There were times on this journey when we, her family, we couldn't be there for her. We were too close, feelings got hurt, lines got drawn, expectations got unmet. And, that's how it is when you're close. You're like a fly on the wall in Sistine Chapel. It looks like insanity up close, but you step back and it's a beautiful thing. Lane remained a steady force through all those times. Shain calls her Batman, as most of you know. I've always seen her as Shain's North Star. She's been that stable, fixed point that Shain can continue to go to and that she can navigate from. So Lane, just so that you know, we're all very, very grateful for you and all that you have done to help Shain to move her through all of this. I can tell you that you have a lifelong friend in that girl right there, and us as well. And if your goal in life was to change people's lives, you've done it. Because you changed all the lives of everyone here, and you changed everyone's lives that in the future that you will touch. With where she's going with this story and the help that she's going to provide, you're a big part of that. And since I haven't seen a Batman since you've been here, as far as I'm concerned, you are Batman.
Next, Shain's friend Monica, who introduced Shain and Becky years ago, said a few words.
Good afternoon. I want to thank each of you for coming. I know it's a journey. It's been a couple hours. Hopefully you got some Starbucks anyway today. And I want to thank Shain for allowing me the honor to speak at this important part of her life. Me and Shain have known each other for 23 years. When you meet that person, friends, family, kindred, you just meet them, you got a connection. Well, that happened between me and Shain.
You can call me Spanky.
Yeah, I will.
That's how you. That's my name.
There's a thing here. I understand what it's like to lose a brother as a child. I didn't even know her story, and we connected that first day. And I changed her name, at least in my reflection, to Spanky, because I didn't really associate her with the name she was given. And I hope that also inspired her to find herself and name herself. But it's just a joke. We're here to honor the life and the love that's left behind by Kevin Ryan Kendzia. I'm really proud of you. I'm proud of you. I've known you a long time, and I know this is a hard step. You've had a lot of support from friends and family, but that's as it should be, as it should be. And you stand as an example of that success, okay? As I can relate to the pain of having a brother pass at a very young age, even though there wasn't time to get to know each of our brothers, their imprint and their life energy lives on through us. It is an honor to help you. It has been an honor, and it will continue to be. We are all here to pay tribute to a small life that was so tragically taken away from us. And although the short time may remain in each of our lives, it's about the connections and how we show up for each other. And I appreciate you coming. I want to express true gratitude, because I know it's a beautiful day, and this is really awesome. I am going to cite from the Christian tradition. Psalm 34:18 says, "The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit." When we feel that lonely feeling of loss, we can stand in strength in our highest power. In our family and in our friends, we have been chosen to be a family. This is our chosen family. This one I wanted to talk to. Here's a one-liner. We must be strong and raise a voice to honor those who have in some way shaped us into who we are, and you have. I would like to also share a poem. Like a shadow in the moonlight, like a whisper in the seas, like echoes of the melody just beyond our reach. In the shadow of our sorrow, past the whisper of goodbye, love shines through eternity in my heart and through your eyes.
To close the ceremony, Shain herself spoke.
Thank you all for showing up. I haven't had a lot of people show up for me in my life. The fact that you guys all showed up for me today blew my mind. I never knew that I was capable of the things that I have done over this past year. And to be honest, had Lane not responded to me, I guarantee there would have been no follow through on my part. I've been defeated so many times in my life. Lane believing in me gave me the follow through that I needed. And it was set off a chain reaction of events. I not only got their little voices heard, their story told, the world knows their name, knows they existed, and knows they mattered. I also got proof that I never lied to anybody. I never made anything up, and it's changed my life for the better. I'm not that same kid that everybody knew, because almost everybody here has known me a long time. You guys, since I was 3 years old, you've known me. Angela, Caitlin, 22 years. Lee-Bug. I don't even know, I was what, 13, 14 whenever you started coming to the daycare. I'm not that kid anymore. I'm not scared. I'm not ashamed of anything that I've been through. I'm not ashamed to tell my story. My voice has been heard, and with that, I'm going to change the world. With Lane's help.
You already are.
Thank you all so much for coming out here. You know, Kevin's funeral, these are their original funeral books. Michael's is filled with signatures from his funeral. Kevin had 6 signatures in his funeral book. 6 people came to that baby's funeral. So thank you for showing up. There's somebody nobody showed up for. I love you all. Thank you.
Kevin's headstone is just perfect. I'll include photos from the ceremony in the Facebook photo album for this episode. While I was in Smithfield, Shain and I took a ride around the neighborhood where she spent the first several years of her life and drove past the home where her 2 brothers died.
There used to be a huge swing set in the backyard there at our house. I think the garage is new too. Yeah, she took us out of the window on that side.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, because the emergency vehicles were in the driveway. It's funny they have those turtles there. Remember me telling you? See the spot right here? This is where this drain pipe is?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That is where it would flood.
Mm-hmm.
And Christy and I would sit in that ditch right there. And we'd find those little silver dollar small turtles. And we would bring them in the house. And Susan had found one dead for the last time. And, told us we weren't allowed to bring turtles in no more. And Chrissy and I took another turtle in the house, and we put it in our Barbie, our He-Man and She-Ra castle in the bed. And we came back, and that turtle was gone. And we just knew that Susan was going to find it. And we were going to be in trouble. We looked everywhere. Like, we teamed up, we looked everywhere for that.
Never
and
found
it was in one of our beds under the pillow.
How?
I don't know. We were so confused, but that's where we found it. 2 months for each baby in the house. Like, it doesn't make sense.
Kevin shouldn't have been there to begin with.
No, he shouldn't have. And they knew they shouldn't have given her that baby.
Yeah. I have to wonder, how did that happen? Was it Gloria?
Gloria Wilson was responsible for giving her Michael and Kevin.
But why? Why was she so sure?
She contacted Susan with Kevin.
Mm-hmm.
Susan did not contact her to get Kevin while she was in the psych hospital.
Yeah.
They offered this woman, this monster, a 2-month-old baby.
Yeah.
He didn't stand a chance, man.
But it's like everyone wanted to just forget about him. For there to be no photos.
Which it just blows my mind that there's no photos, because there were photos of him.
Well, the doll's gone, right?
The doll is gone.
Any photos are gone, unless there's some
of Kevin, except for the ones on the
that we hope are on the film.
We hope are on that.
Yeah, I don't understand why everything is missing except just the shoes and the blanket and the keys.
Yeah, and there's a pacifier too, but I couldn't put the pacifier out.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't do it. It's sad. It looks sad.
Mm-hmm.
But it was really nice to be able to have their original funeral books in there. It was really nice to have their original funeral books with their original funeral, like,
the programs,
and
then to get everybody to sign it today.
Yeah. Even with what I've been through, with what Susan did to me, like, it still blows my mind that a parent would do the things that she did, and that so many others are doing. Like, it just doesn't make sense.
No. And the fact that she wanted them so badly.
Yeah.
For what?
Like, for what?
Yeah.
For what? Why?
To be a hero, like she said, to impress her dad.
My grandfather, I can't imagine that he would have fucked her up so bad. It would have caused this. But even though it doesn't matter what you've been through,
Mm-hmm.
you can't use that as an excuse to put somebody else through the hell you live through. Like, It's not okay. It's not an excuse.
No.
And just because you went through something doesn't mean you are going to be that monster that, statistics claim you're going to be.
That you don't have to be. You just don't have to be. And especially to the degree that she took it out on you and Michael and Kevin.
Yeah, it just...
Like, that's beyond just, I was traumatized in my childhood. That's why they say Munchausen by proxy is not a mental illness.
It's not.
That's why Dr. Feldman says it is just medical child abuse.
Yeah, you're crazy. obviously it takes somebody that's messed up in the head to poison a child and watch them die.
But
slowly.
You know right from wrong.
But then again, you have to be crazy to sexually abuse a child as well. So being crazy is not what makes you do those things.
No.
Doing those things makes you a fucking psychopath.
Yeah.
Like,
right, and it's not even being crazy because you do know it's wrong what you're doing.
Wrong.
Yeah.
When Susan was like asking me if she could be held accountable for things that she wasn't aware that she was doing, and in the very next breath asked me if I found her binder, her trophy binder,
for her to keep all of that alone is messed up.
She only kept stuff that she thought she got away with. Documentation on different events that, you know, she claimed I lied about.
Yeah.
The trophy binder, the magazine article about cocaine and SIDS.
Yeah.
Like, she kept all of it. All of it. Everything is dated. Like, dated and labeled. The stuff that we have, that we found, she had Chrissy box all this stuff up, and she was getting rid of all of it. Like, this stuff wasn't going to exist much longer. But Chrissy didn't take it and, you know, throw it out yet. She contributed to the open investigation against her. Like, she contributed the evidence that was needed to show a pattern of behavior, and then she opened her mouth a little too much. And, well, you don't get raised by a narcissist and not learn a thing or two.
Right.
I definitely used those recordings to protect myself.
Yeah.
So she couldn't say that I had done something or had been mean or, you know, in any way I would have evidence to back up that I had been nothing but civil.
I'll pause here for another quick sponsor break, and then you'll hear my recent conversation with Shain about this year's events. I figure a lot of people will want to know how did you react when you heard about Susan?
At first, when I first read the Facebook post that Christy sent me, I'll be honest, I called bullshit. I didn't believe it. I called Detective immediately to find out if he could confirm it, because I didn't want to believe it until it was confirmed. So the next morning when he confirmed it, that's when it hit me, but I didn't know how to feel. I wasn't sad per se. It was very confusing. I don't know. I still don't know how I feel exactly about her actually passing. But now that she has passed and I've had time to live without her here, I have found so much peace and just freedom.
Yeah, I mean, I remember it being very complicated because it's not like people would imagine how it's just, well, the person who abused you for years is gone and now you should be happy. And I know you were worried about people reacting that way.
Yeah, I did get messages from friends kind of on the happy side of, you know, Susan being dead. I thought I would be happy, but that's not what it was. The role she was supposed to play in my life as a mother, I felt conflicted because I should have been really sad and upset about her passing. But because of the role she did play in my life, I didn't feel sad. So it just left me more confused with more questions about it than anything. I did cry at one point, and then I got mad at myself for crying, because why would I cry over somebody that did the horrible things she did to me? So it was just super confusing.
Well, it's all kind of a part of the whole situation. I think we can't imagine how you'd react to something like this because we can't imagine everything you went through. So for anyone to try to tell you how to feel is making presumptions that we don't have the place to make. But I hope you weren't too hard on yourself.
No, well, I was.
I know you were.
I guess it was just I don't know, it wasn't really a grieving period, but there was a period after the time that she passed that, I was really hard on myself for the way I was feeling, the way I wasn't feeling, and the way that I would think somebody was supposed to feel in that situation. But that seems to have all passed now. Like, I've found so much peace and freedom in her death.
Well, that's good. I'm glad you're at that place and that you have supports to help you get there. I mean, that's part of the whole thing is you didn't have this support even, a year and a half ago. So then once you got the results from the tox screen, that kind of changed everything.
Yeah, that changed everything. But then again, I knew that it wasn't right that she just died like that. I mean, I had that gut feeling that it was going to be an overdose of some sort. But now that I have the results and it's such an extreme overdose, it made me question the circumstances surrounding her death. So that's why I'm having it investigated.
Have you heard anything on that recently?
No, I will be traveling to South Carolina this week, and I will be making a stop to find out if I can get any updates.
Oh, good. Okay. You did all the work to get the ceremony going for Kevin's dedication for his headstone. So do you want to talk about that at all?
I did all the planning and the organizing, but as far as doing all the work for it, there was so much that went into it. First of all, Becky and Monica getting up there and saying the things they did, that was amazing. My friend Angela helped with the flowers. She donated the money for the flowers. Everybody came from at least 5 hours for everybody except for 2 people to get there. So, a lot went into it, but it was beautiful. It was the best day of my life.
Wow.
Yeah, I haven't quit smiling since.
Let's talk about one more thing. How are you doing now with all of this behind you?
I'm doing amazing. I cannot tell you how long it's been since I've been happy or if I've ever really been happy before now. I just feel like this pressure and this weight has been lifted off of me for so long over the past year or so. Once we started working on this, once I had contact with Susan again, I had to live in this traumatized version of myself, like all the time. I was just constantly being triggered and, having to relive everything over and over again. And since Susan passed, and now that Kevin's headstone is placed and we've had that ceremony, it's just like so much weight has been lifted off of me. I'm just doing amazing. I never thought that I could do this well.
That's awesome. So what is next?
So what's next is currently I'm writing a book, and Lane is going to be my co-author on this book. There's also a couple other projects in the works, but I can't talk about those yet.
Yep, and everybody knows that I'll be keeping them updated.
Oh yeah, definitely.
As always, I'll continue to provide updates as I get them. Keep an eye on the podcast's Facebook page. That's it for this week. Join me next week for another episode. If you like the show, please follow or subscribe to Suffer the Little Children on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Spreaker, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast listening app. And please leave me a 5-star rating and a positive review on your favorite podcast platform. Visit the website at sufferthelittlechildrenpod.com. You can support the show by visiting patreon.com/stlcpod, where you can become a patron for rewards ranging from a shout-out by name on the show to bonus content and exclusive gifts. You can also support the show at ko-fi.com/stlcpod. Follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram at Suffer the Little Children Pod and on TikTok at STLC Pod. View photos related to today's episode on Facebook. For more stories like the one you heard today, visit sufferthelittlechildrenblog.com. This podcast is researched, written, hosted, edited, and produced by Lane. Intro theme music is by Dream Note Music, and all music for the show is licensed from audiojungle.net. For more information about preventing or reporting child abuse, visit childhelp.org or call your area's child abuse hotline. And remember, if you see something, say something.